Hello there, Orange Fan 13 here. It's been a little while since I've made a video, so I present to you a chessboard with my cat. So, because I'm running out of ideas, I decided to get a new hobby. And, this is it. It's chess. So, because I have nothing better to do with my life, I decided to make a new video, and I'm going to teach you how to play chess with my cat. So, the first thing I'm going to teach you is how to set up the board, because if you don't know how to set up the board, then how are you supposed to play? I have all the white pieces here, and yeah, I'm just gonna get started. So, if I grab the king and the queen pieces here, you're going to put the king on this square and the queen on this square. The queen is always on the same color tile as herself. Then you are going to take your bishops and you're going to put them on the king and the queen side on these tiles. There's coordinates for these tiles. I'll tell you what they are later. I don't know, I forgot what I was saying. Anyways, knights. You're going to put the knights next to the bishops. And then finally, you put the rooks on the final tiles. Now that you have all your good pieces, we are going to line up all of the pawns. There's eight of them if you count, but... Okay, so that's how you set up the white side of the board. We are now going to set up the board for the black side. Mine are brown, but you know what I mean. So basically what we're going to do for the black pieces, or brown, I'm just going to call them black. You're going to put the king and the queen so that it's mirroring the white side. And also what I said with the queen for the white side applies here, because now the dark queen is on the dark square tile. And now if we take our bishops, we're going to do the same thing we did with the white side. Then we're going to repeat this with the knights. And finally the rooks. And once you set up the pawns, now you have a complete board setup. You are now ready to play a game of chess with your grandmother. But before you do that, I need to teach you how the pieces move, starting with the pawn. So, with the pawn can move 2 spaces on its first move, or just one, in a straight direction. If a pawn decides to only move 1 space instead of 2, it cannot move 2 spaces afterwards. Once it makes its decision, it can no longer move 2. Then it just moves 1. Starting with next with the piece behind the pawn, we have the knight. The knight moves in an L-shaped formation. So like that, or like this. Or, let's say the knight was like right here. The knight could also move in this direction, or this direction, or this direction. It's an L shape, you know how L's work. Bishop. So, pretending these pawns have moved, now the bishop's path is open. The bishop can move diagonally in any direction, any diagonal direction, as many spaces as they want. So, if a bishop was right here, it could also go backwards, not just forwards. A pawn cannot do that, unfortunately. I kind of forgot what I was trying to say. The rook is the same thing as the bishop, but it's only straight directions. A rook cannot move diagonally in any way. This is not a legal move. You cannot do that with a rook. It's only straight. Just like the bishop, they can move as many spaces as they want. Also, I remember what I was trying to say with the bishop. because this bishop is on a dark tile square, it could only go on the dark tile square diagonals. Because this bishop is on the light tiles, it can only go on the light tile diagonals. The bishop cannot just randomly decide to change color tile diagonals for any reason. You just can't do that. I wish you could do that though, because it would be extremely helpful. Finally, we move on to our king and our queen. Starting with the queen, let's move this pawn out of the way. 2 spaces so it's legal. And now the queen's path is opened up. So the queen is basically, basically the queen is the greatest piece in all of chess because it could move literally anywhere. A queen could go like this. Now not in the same turn, obviously, but once a queen makes a move like this, now she is able to either go diagonally, straight, the other diagonally, she go backwards. The only thing the queen cannot do is jump over pieces. I forgot to explain that the reason I was able to move my knight without moving the pawn out of the way like I had to do with the other pieces is because the knight has the ability to jump over other pieces, including opposing pieces without capturing them, which I'll talk about that later. So, yeah, the knight can basically just decide to hop over a pawn for whatever reason. No other piece can do that. So if you want to move your knight, you do not have to move your pawn out of the way. You could, but it's stupid because you don't have to. Well, no, actually it's not, because then that opens up your bishop. So you could do whatever you want in a game of chess, really. But I have to teach you first. Unless you already know, then awesome. Now that I have taught you all the core mechanics of chess, along with my cat, I don't know. Oh, I forgot to explain how the king moves. So, once you move your pawn out of the way, just like the queen and the king, the thing with the king, right? Not only is it the weakest piece because you cannot purposefully put it in any situation where there's danger, which again I'll talk about capturing and stuff later. So, yeah. The king can move 1 space in any direction. So, if the king wants to go diagonally 1 square, he can. If a king wants to go this way diagonally 1 square, he can. If the king wants to go this way. The king is basically the queen, but they are limited to only 1 square at a time. They cannot go as many spaces as they want, like the queen can. Which is unfortunate, but that's just the rules of chess. I don't know what to tell you. Now that I have gone through all of the basic movements of the chess pieces, I am now going to tell you the coordinates of the board. Using this Crayola marker, I am going to label my chessboard accordingly. So, the chessboard is divided into rows and columns. I confused the two for a second. So, with that being said, I'm going to label these columns by letter. So, this is the A column. B, that looks terrible, I'm sorry. C, D, my handwriting is so bad. E, F, G, and H. So, those are the letters for the column. And now I'm going to number them accordingly. So this tile would be considered A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, A7, and A8. Zoe, please do not erase that. I will be very upset if you do that. So, I have now numbered and lettered all of the I have coordinated the chessboard, so now you know what the coordinates are. So, if I were to move my knight, so currently this knight right here is on the G1 square. If I were to move this knight, it is now on the F3 square. So the coordinates of this move would be knight F3. Now, if we were to switch to the black side, just like the setting up of the pieces, the black side is basically just a mirror of the white side. So, if we label it again, instead of this tile being A1, it is H1, because it is a mirror of this column, which for white is H. So for black, it would also be H, because it's mirrored, which means this column is G, F, E, D, it still looks really bad, C, B, and A. And then if we number it again, it's just 1, 2, 3. You number them all the way to 8. So now the coordinates are basically just flipped. So if we were to move again this knight, which is the opposite of this knight, if we were to move it like this, as it is currently on the B1 tile, now the coordinates of this move are knight C3. So basically the coordinates for the black side are just the reverse of the white side, if that makes sense. Now that I have gone over the coordinates of the chessboard, I am now going to show you how capturing works for every single piece. So, starting with pawns, because they're the most confusing and I should go over them first. So basically the whole idea behind pawns is you can only move 2 spaces on its first turn, but ignoring that, a pawn can only move 1 square every turn forward. They cannot go this way, diagonal. They can't do that. They just can't. But the exception to this is with capturing. So if black moves this pawn, opposite diagonal of this pawn, now this pawn is able to capture this pawn, because pawns capture diagonally. That's the only exception to pawns moving forward. So if a pawn were to move like this, if it was like, say, a rook or a queen, this pawn would be able to be taken. But a pawn cannot capture forwards. They can only capture diagonally. So these pawns are just essentially stuck. They literally can't move anymore, because there's a pawn blocking them from moving. Now, of course, let's say this knight moves here, and black knight moves to the F3 square. I forgot to label the coordinates. This is E4, and then for black, this would be E5. So now that the knight is on the F3 square for white, black decides to move their pawn on D5. I couldn't even read my own handwriting. So because this pawn, well, I mean, realistically, they couldn't really have done anything about their pawn anyway. But so the knight decides to capture the pawn on the E5 square. Let's say this pawn decides to move forward instead of capturing. Now that once the knight moves out of the way, this pawn, this is a really bad move for the knight, by the way. Please don't do this in an actual game. Your knight's just dead on either side. The other player can choose which pawn they use to capture. Just don't do this. Don't do that. But for example purposes, now that this knight is out of the way, the pawn can now move forward. So yeah, that's how pawn capturing works. And also complicated pawn movements. Now, capturing for pretty much any other piece is basically what I showed you with the knight. If a piece lands on another piece, then it's captured. So, for example, let's make a bishop capture. Let's put a bishop like here. Alright, I am now going to move this pawn to the F3 square. Yeah. So, I think I'm messing up my coordinates. I don't know what I'm doing. So, alright. I remembered. My bad. So now this bishop here, because this pawn is on the bishop's diagonal path, the bishop can now capture the pawn that is on the f3 square. So this bishop that is on the b2 square can go over to f3 and take the pawn. Now, of course, black should capture the bishop with the pawn. So, yeah. But for example purposes, that is how a bishop is able to capture a piece. If we have a rook capture, for example, say we're going to bring this pawn forward, takes. Now, once I move this pawn forward 1, or forward 2, this would actually be a great time to show you probably one of the most confusing rules in all of chess, but because I just kind of accidentally set it up here, I might as well show you. So, this pawn moves 2 spaces, right? It is now on the a4 square for black. So, this white pawn, which is on the b5 square, is able to move on the a6 square, taking the pawn. Now, you might be extremely confused as to what I just did, but this is a special rule in chess called en passant, which is a French term. I don't really know what it means, if it has a meaning, but basically it's a rule where if a pawn moves 2 spaces and there's a pawn next to it, the pawn can move diagonally and capture the pawn. Basically like a ghost capture, pretty much. Now, this really is... I don't know what I was saying. I was just about to say something about how this isn't a good move, but I mean, what do I know? I'm not good at chess. I'm just showing you the basics. But yeah, that's the en passant rule. But saying that doesn't happen, it's saying the pawn does not decide to do the en passant. Now this rook is able to take the pawn by landing on it and capturing it. This is not a good move, because now the rook is able to just take the other rook, and this pawn can't capture it. So, basically white just loses a rook for no reason. So the en passant is a much better move, because now if the rook decides to take the pawn, now black is just losing a rook for no reason. But then, of course, this pawn could just take, and then it defends the rook, and yeah. So, that's the en passant and rook captures, and at this point, I think you get how capturing works. I don't really think I need to explain it much further. So, with that being said, I am going to currently try to figure out if there's anything else I need to explain. So, after about 1 minute of thinking, I'm pretty sure I have explained all the basics of chess. So, that's nice. Also, before I go, I also just want to explain real quick with the en passant rule. Let's say this rook was right here on the b4 square. So, say this pawn moves out of the way, and the rook moves here, and the pawn is not moved. Basically, this formation. All right, the rook cannot do en passant. It is solely a pawn-only move. Only pawns can do en passant. So, just wanted to make that a little bit clear, just in case. But I mean, it was probably already obvious anyway. So, yeah, that's it. I taught you how to play chess. Now, that being said, I don't really plan on teaching any kind of advanced stuff, because I myself am garbage at chess and am not good at teaching that. But now you are ready to play chess with anyone you please. And if you do decide to play a game, let me know how you do. Because, me personally, I managed to beat my grandma in chess like 5 times. So, now that I've given you all the information you need to know about basic chess, I don't know, challenge your grandma to a game, see if you can beat her. And if you do, congratulations. But your grandma might actually be good at chess, so if that's the case, then you might have a problem. But she can teach you better than I can anyway, so take it as a learning opportunity. Anyways, I'm going to stop with my little rant, and I'm going to... I don't know what I'm going to do after this. Anyways, the video's over, bye.